The smell hits you first. Burnt coffee, bacon grease, the particular exhaustion that soaks into a diner uniform after 9 hours and doesn't wash out until Sunday. The checkered floor near booth 3 is sticky again. The rotary phone behind the counter is ringing again. Maya hasn't sat down since 11. She doesn't notice him coming in. That's the thing about a dinner rush. There's too much noise, too many plates, too many people who need something right now for any one person to register. But she notices the quiet. The way table 6, who had not stopped arguing about a football game since they sat down at 5, just stopped, mid-sentence, all at once. She looked up. Tall, unhurried, white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled, top buttons open, no jacket. He moved through the crowded diner the way very few people move, like the room was already his and he was simply choosing to occupy it. He seated himself in her section without waiting, didn't look at the menu, didn't look at anything. He took out his phone, set it on the table, and then raised his hand and clicked his fingers, twice. Through the plate glass behind him, 2 black SUVs sat at the curb. 3 men in dark suits stood outside them with their arms crossed, watching the door. They had not come in. Every table in the diner had gone quiet. Dana appeared at Maya's shoulder, Dana who had worked this counter for 11 years, who had the kind of instincts that come from a decade of reading rooms for a living. She found Maya's eyes and gave one slow, deliberate shake of her head. Don't. Maya looked at the man. She looked at the window. She looked down at the name tag pinned to her uniform, Maya in small block letters, like she was reminding herself of something. 2 years of swallowed words rose in her throat, 9 hours on her feet. Her brother's school fees are sitting in a drawer at home, due on Friday. She walked over to the table. He still hadn't looked up from his phone. She stood beside the table and waited until the silence between them was loud enough that he couldn't ignore it. Then he looked up, dark eyes, a face that gave nothing, a stillness that wasn't calm. It was controlled, the kind that means 1,000 calculations are running beneath it and none of them are visible. He held her gaze. 1 second, 2, 3. "You need to leave," Maya said. He looked at her for one more beat, then stood, smoothed his shirt with one hand, and walked out. The door swung shut, the little bell above it chimed, absurdly cheerful, and the diner was so quiet that every person inside heard the car door close from across the room. Dana appeared at Maya's shoulder again. One word, Maya. "I know," Maya said. She picked up the coffee pot. She went back to work. She did not know his name yet. She did not know that by 6 o'clock the next morning he would own the building she was standing in. She did not know what she had started. But she was about to find out all 3. Maya arrived at 6, the way she always did. It was the only hour the diner was hers, before the kitchen noise started, before Dana arrived with her thermos and her opinions, before the breakfast crowd came in and the smell of coffee embedded itself permanently into the next 12 hours of Maya's life. She liked 6 a.m. for exactly that reason, the quiet, the 30 minutes of just her and the prep list and the particular blue-gray light that came through the plate glass before the sun was fully up. She saw the notice from the sidewalk. It was taped to the inside of the door, centered, at eye level, the kind of placement that is deliberate, not incidental. She thought for 1 second that it was a health inspection update. Roy had been paranoid about inspections since November and had a habit of taping reminders to surfaces where no one could miss them. But the paper was wrong, too white, too clean. The letterhead on it was not the county's. There was a date at the bottom, last night's date. The ink was barely 12 hours old. Maya read it again, then a 3rd time, slowly, the way she had learned to read things that mattered, without expression, without rushing, because rushing meant missing something, and missing something had never once been an option she could afford. She read every line, she turned the page over, she read the back, which was blank, and then she turned it face forward again and stood with it for a moment longer. Then she folded it in thirds and put it in her apron pocket. Roy was already in the back booth when she came inside. She hadn't noticed his car out front, hadn't thought to look. He was sitting with both hands around a mug he must have made himself because the machine wasn't on yet, which meant he'd been here a while. His face was the color of the counter at the end of a long Saturday. He looked at her. He looked at her apron pocket. He said nothing. She unlocked the door. She pulled the notice from the glass and read it standing in the doorway with the morning air at her back. Park Holdings, LLC, Deed of Sale Commercial Property and Premises, effective immediately upon execution of transfer. Dana arrived at 6:30, read the notice over Maya's shoulder in complete silence, and stayed that way for longer than Dana ever stayed quiet about anything. "Park Holdings," she said finally. "I know." "Maya, I know." The shock was there. She could feel it moving through her chest like cold water finding the lowest point, slow, thorough, looking for somewhere to settle. She had felt it before, in other rooms, over other pieces of paper. She knew how to set it aside and retrieve it after the shift, when there was time and privacy and no one watching her face. She had a shift to open. She started the coffee. The machine coughed to life the way it always did, shuddering once before it caught. The smell came, bitter and familiar, and completely ordinary, and Maya stood at the counter with both hands braced against the surface and let the ordinariness of it hold her for exactly 3 seconds. Then she got to work. He came back at noon. No SUVs this time, or at least none parked visibly outside. Just him and one aide, a lean man in a charcoal suit who held the door without being asked and positioned himself near the entrance in the particular way of someone trained to look like they aren't watching anything while watching everything. Jae-min walked to the counter and sat down. Not a booth, the counter, which is where you sit when you want to see the whole room and have the whole room see you. Maya came to him because it was her section and that was her job, and she was not going to let him have the satisfaction of making her rearrange either of those facts. He looked at her the same way he had looked at her last night, that complete, unblinking attention that gave nothing back. Then he spoke, and his voice was the same as she remembered too, low, unhurried, the kind of quiet that makes you lean in slightly without meaning to. "Staff retention," he said. "All current employees. Renovations beginning Thursday. A new menu consultation scheduled for the following week." He said it the way someone reads from a list they have already memorized and have no particular feelings about. Then he looked directly at her, not at the room, not at the counter, at her, and said, "Manager, effective Monday." He stood before she could speak. He smoothed his shirt with one hand, the same way he had the night before, the full stop at the end of a sentence he considered finished. He walked out. The aide followed. The door closed. The diner held a beat of silence. "Manager," Dana said from somewhere to Maya's left. "Apparently." "Maya, that could actually be—" "I know what it could be." She picked up the coffee pot, which had become her default object for having something to do with her hands, and went to refill booth 4. Booth 4 was empty. The booth beside it was not. The aide had settled into the corner seat with a laptop open and a phone pressed to his ear, conducting what sounded like a long and detailed conversation with someone's legal team. Maya began restocking the condiment tray at the adjacent table, mustard, hot sauce, the little napkin holder that was always low by noon. It was a job she could do without looking at her hands, a job that placed her approximately 4 feet away. She was not invisible, she understood that. She was simply not considered a threat, which in this context amounted to the same thing. She caught 4 sentences. The press coverage of the incident had been significant. The value of a public face, someone employed prior to acquisition, was considerable in terms of optics. The diner needed to read as independently operated. The manager was the key piece. Maya set down the mustard. She stood at the table and looked at the condiment tray and did not move for a moment. The noise of the lunch rush continued around her, plates, voices, the cook calling an order through the window, and she stood in the middle of it and understood with a clarity that arrived all at once and settled like cold weight exactly what had happened. He hadn't promoted her, he had acquired her. Her defiance, the most impulsive 4 words she'd spoken in 2 years, was useful to him. It was proof. The kind of unscripted, genuine moment that no hired publicist could manufacture, and he had seen it, valued it, and folded it into his plans before she'd even learned his name. She was not a person in this equation, she was a detail, a credibility asset, a piece that made the picture look right. She picked up the coffee pot. She went back to work. She did not let it reach her face, not the anger, not the particular scorching indignity of understanding that the worst thing he could have done to her wasn't a threat or a firing. It was this, being useful without being seen. She had spent her whole life being that. She had not expected it to follow her here too. Dana waited until the afternoon lull. That was how Maya knew it was serious. Dana was not, by nature, a waiter. She had opinions the way other people had reflexes, immediate and unfiltered, and the fact that she had held this one since morning meant she had been deciding how to say it. She sat across from Maya in the break room with her phone flat on the table between them and walked her through it the way you walk someone through something that cannot be unsaid, quietly, factually, without editorializing. Park Syndicate, 12 counties, interests in shipping, construction, 3 restaurant groups, and a property portfolio so thoroughly cross-referenced with everything else that untangling the legitimate from the other kind had defeated 3 separate federal investigations over the last decade. Every case had opened, every case had been quietly shelved. Jae Min Park had never been charged, had never been photographed at anything he shouldn't have been photographed at, had, as far as anyone could legally prove, never personally ordered a single thing that couldn't be defended in a courtroom. He had also, the articles made clear, never needed to. Maya read to the end of the last one. She handed the phone back across the table. She said nothing. Dana waited. When Maya still didn't speak, she said, "You could go to the labor board. There have to be rules about acquisition without notification." No. There might be something about the manner of the transfer, the timeline. Dana. Maya looked at her. No. Because there was never a rule that reached men like this. That was the entire architecture of it. The rules existed. They simply did not apply, in practice, to people who had had a decade to learn exactly where the rules stopped. She went back to the floor. At 4 o'clock, the bell above the door chimed and Marcus walked in. He was 17 and already an inch taller than her, which she had not entirely forgiven him for. He came in with his backpack on one shoulder and his headphones around his neck, and the expression he always had when he'd been turning something over in his head since lunch, a slight furrow between his brows, his mouth a little open, like the thought was still forming. He dropped onto a stool at the counter and looked at her. "Are there any fries left?" "I'm fine, thank you for asking." "Are there, though?" She made him a plate. He ate with the concentrated efficiency of a teenage boy who had skipped his afternoon snack and wasn't going to pretend otherwise. She refilled someone's coffee. She wiped the section of counter nearest him. They argued, briefly, with the ease of long practice, about whether finishing the problems but not writing them up constituted completing his chemistry homework. It did not. He maintained that it did. He stole 2 of her fries on the way out. She batted his hand and missed by half a second. He grinned at her over his shoulder, his whole face in it, the grin she'd known since he was 4 years old, and pushed through the door into the afternoon. It was 4 minutes long. Maya stood at the counter after the door swung shut and felt for the first time all day the cold weight she'd been holding below the surface begin to press upward. She put both hands flat on the counter. She breathed. She let the noise of the diner fill back in around her. The kitchen, the tables, the ordinary, reliable sound of a room that was still running. That evening she told Marcus everything was fine. He believed her, or knew her well enough to let her believe he did, which was its own kind of kindness. She lay awake until the early hours, staring at the ceiling, doing the arithmetic she had been doing since she was 18, what she needed, what she had, how wide the gap was, and whether she could close it. She had always closed it. She would close this one. She told herself this. She did not sleep.
Monday came and Maya came with it. She had stood in front of her closet that morning for longer than she would admit, which was ridiculous, and she had known it was ridiculous while she was doing it. She put on what she always wore. She showed up at 6 the way she always did. She opened the diner, started the coffee, and began learning what managing it actually meant, which turned out to be the same things as before, with more paperwork and the same amount of sleep. Jae-min appeared on Tuesday, then Thursday, then the following Tuesday. She mapped it without deciding to do so. It was something she had always done, the same low, continuous attention she'd given difficult tables, difficult landlords, difficult systems. You logged patterns before they became problems. That was just sense. She noted which aide he brought. It was almost always the same one, the lean man from the counter day, whose name she hadn't caught, but who took his coffee black and positioned himself at a precise angle to the door every time. She noticed that Jae-min's silences had gradations, that his team read them, that there was a stillness he carried into a room on hard days, a degree or 2 cooler than his regular quiet, and the men around him adjusted without being told, tightening up, shortening their sentences, not offering information unless asked. She filed this, not because she intended to use it, because she had always filed things, and it had always eventually been useful. He spoke to her the way he spoke to the aide, to the contractor overseeing the renovations, to anyone in the room with a function, directly, briefly, and with the assumption that she would handle whatever he said without requiring anything further from him. She did handle it. She was also not a function, but he hadn't asked her opinion on that, and she hadn't offered it. The gap between them was exactly that wide. She had measured it the first week and hadn't looked again. Her regulars continued the way regulars do, indifferent to ownership changes and new management alike. Booth 4 on Tuesdays, she had refilled that table's coffee for 3 years before she was a manager, and she refilled it after. Cash always. He came in at 12:30, ordered the same thing, ate unhurriedly, and left a to-go bag for someone who apparently never came with him. He always wrote a name on it before he left it at the counter. Shin. She noticed, the way she noticed everything. She filed it. She did not think about it again. What she was thinking about during the quiet stretches, when the lunch crowd thinned and the kitchen noise dropped, was the gap, not between herself and Jae-min exactly, but between what she was in this building and what she was supposed to be. Those were not yet the same thing. She was working on closing it. She had been saving the pie since noon. That was the thing. She had set it aside herself, covered it with a square of plastic wrap, written nothing on it because it was her dinner and she didn't need to, and placed it on the second shelf of the reach-in where Dana wouldn't accidentally serve it. Sweet potato, the last slice, Roy's supplier had stopped carrying them in November, and this batch was the first in months, and she had been thinking about it quietly through the entire dinner rush. She found him at the counter at 9:47, the plate already in front of him, half the slice gone. She stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment. She did the arithmetic, the same arithmetic she'd been doing her whole life, the one where she weighed what something cost against what it would cost her to say so. Then she came out from behind the doorway, walked to the counter, and sat down across from him on a stool. She did not say anything. Neither did he. The diner was empty, and the kitchen was quiet, and the only sound was the low complaint of the overhead light that she had been meaning to have replaced for 2 weeks. Jae-min ate the way he did everything, without hurry, without excess, and Maya sat with her hands flat on the counter and looked at the space between them and said nothing. 40 seconds, 50, almost a full minute. He said without looking up, "My mother used to make it." It arrived the way those sentences always arrive, unannounced, with no preamble, spoken to the plate rather than to her, as if the thought had found an exit before he could close it off. He did not look up. She did not speak. She understood instinctively that speech was the wrong move, the way you understand not to move too quickly in certain kinds of silence. He finished the last of it. He set the fork down. His face was exactly what it always was, composed, unreadable, giving nothing, and if she hadn't been sitting close enough to see that he had been somewhere else for those 40 seconds, she might have believed the expression. But she had been sitting close enough. She had seen it. He stood. He smoothed his shirt with one hand. He left the exact amount on the counter and walked out without further explanation, and a little bell rang once in the empty room. Maya sat at the counter for a while after. She thought about the way he had said it, not told her, said it, which was different, which meant it had come from somewhere below the controlled quiet he carried everywhere. She thought about a man with 2 SUVs at the curb and a property portfolio that had outlasted 3 federal investigations, briefly, accidentally, sitting at a diner counter with a fork in his hand and being somewhere else entirely. She filed it, but it was the first thing she had filed about him that she found herself returning to. She heard it from the back. A sharp crack, then the specific sound of glass finding the floor, not shattering all at once but cascading, a long sustained collapse, and she was through the kitchen door before the last of it settled. She stood in the frame and looked at the window and at the brick on the checkered floor and at the glass spread around it like something decorative catching the light. The diner was empty. She had locked up 20 minutes ago. She crossed to it carefully, watching her footing, and crouched beside the brick. The card was rubber-bandaged to it, clean white stock, small, precise type, the kind of font that comes from someone who understands that restraint is its own form of threat. She unfolded it, read it once, read it again. Marcus's full name, his school, the address, including the building. She stayed crouched for a moment. The glass was around her feet, and the night air was coming through the open window frame, and the card was in her hand, and she held all of it very still, the way she had learned to hold things that could not be dropped. Then she stood. She set the card on the counter. She found the broom. She swept the glass first, the whole of it, along the baseboard, into the corners, the pieces that had skittered under the nearest table. She collected it into the dustpan and disposed of it, and moved the nearest table so she could get the section underneath. She found a piece of cardboard in the back and taped it across the window frame against the night air. She washed her hands. She dried them. Then she picked up the card, picked up her phone, and called Jae-min Park. He answered on the first ring. She had not planned what she was going to say. She stood at the counter with the card in her hand and the repaired window behind her and the empty diner around her, and when she heard the line connect, she said,
Someone sent me a message tonight. It had my brother's name on it. Silence. Not the silence of processing. She had heard enough of his silences by now to know the difference. This one was already past processing. He had arrived somewhere before she finished the sentence. "Stay in the building," he said. "Don't move the card." "I already touched it." "I know. Don't move it again." She set it back on the counter. She remained standing. There was something in the air of the phone call that had not been there in any of their previous exchanges, some charge that neither of them named and neither of them needed to, because it was already decided. She had called him, and not Dana, and not Dana, and not anyone else. He had answered on the first ring. The distance that had sat between them for 5 weeks had not disappeared. It had simply become something else. "Shin," she said. "Yes," he said. "Just that."
He arrived 20 minutes after the call. Not alone. 2 men she hadn't seen before moved through the diner with an efficiency that suggested they had assessed it before they walked in. Jae-min stood at the counter and laid out the plan the way he laid out everything else, flat, sequenced, without asking whether she was following. Safe house, west side, already arranged. Marcus relocated tonight. His team would handle Shin directly. She didn't need the details, and he wasn't offering them. She listened to the whole of it. Then she said, "Can I show you something?" He stopped. She pulled her order pad from her apron, the same one she'd been using since March, its corners soft with handling, and set it on the counter between them. She had not written it up tonight. She hadn't needed to. She had been carrying it for 3 months without knowing she was carrying it. She told him about booth 4. Tuesdays, 12:30, without variation. Always cash, always the same order, always the to-go bag left at the counter with the name written on it in the same hand. Shin. She told him about the pattern, not just the day and the time, but the texture of it, the way the man ate without checking his phone, the way he always sat facing the door, the way he lingered exactly long enough and not a minute passed. She told him she had clocked his car twice in the lot, same spot, backed in. She told him all of it the way she had once managed difficult tables, flat, unhurried, without editorializing, because the facts were sufficient, and she had always known that. When she finished, the diner was very quiet. Jae-min looked at the pad. He looked at her. Something moved across his face, not surprise exactly, but the recalibration that follows it, the moment when a category you had assigned to something turns out to be the wrong one. He was quiet for long enough that one of the men by the door shifted his weight. "That's his lieutenant," Jae-min said finally. "I know what Shin means now," Maya said. "I didn't when I started filing it." Another silence, shorter this time. "Today is Monday." "Yes. He'll be in tomorrow at 12:30. Jae-min set both hands on the counter. He looked at the pad again, and then at the covered window, and then at her. And this time the look was different from every look he had given her across the past 5 weeks. He was not looking at the details. He was not looking at an asset or a piece that made the picture read correctly. He was looking at her. Monday night briefing. You lead. 4 words. She had been managed and moved and acquired and arranged around, and he had spoken to her every time. And now he was speaking to her, and they both understood the difference. She pulled the pad toward her. She led. She was restocking the condiment trays when he came in. Not a Tuesday, not his usual day, which meant this was not his usual kind of visit, and she noted it, the way she noted everything, quietly, without changing her expression, and kept working until he sat down at the counter. He was alone, no aide, no car at the curb that she could see, just him in the white dress shirt, sleeves rolled the way they always were, and a manila folder set flat on the counter in front of him. She finished the tray. She came to him. He slid the folder across. She opened it. 2 documents, identical, her name typed cleanly across the deed of ownership on both. She read it the way she read everything that mattered, without rushing, without expression, from the top, every line, and the diner was quiet around them, because it was mid-morning, and the rush hadn't started, and the world had not yet made its usual demands on the hour. She read to the end. She looked at him. "You threw me out of this place," he said. "Seemed only right." He was not performing. She had seen him perform, for contractors, for aides, for rooms full of people calculating his next move, and this was not that. His face was doing what it had done for one unguarded moment over a slice of sweet potato pie, giving something, briefly, without taking it back. She looked at the deed again. Her name, her diner, which had been Roy's diner, which had been the place she'd opened at 6 every morning for 3 years, with her uniform smelling of yesterday, and her brother's school fees in a drawer at home, and 2 years of swallowed words sitting in her throat. She thought about the version of herself who had stood beside that table and said, "You need to leave," not because she had a plan, not because she knew what she was starting, but because she had one rule and she had kept it. She thought about the glass on the floor and the card on the counter, and her hands not shaking until they finally did. She thought about a briefing on a Monday night and 4 words spoken to her instead of at her for the first time. She picked up the pen. She signed her name the way she wrote everything, clearly, without flourish, because she had never needed flourish to mean what she said. She slid one copy back across the counter. He took it. He did not say anything else, and she did not need him to. He smoothed his shirt once with one hand and stood, and this time she recognized the gesture for what it actually was. Not a full stop, not a dismissal, just the way a man punctuated a moment when he had nothing left to add. The door swung shut. The bell rang once. Maya put the deed in her apron pocket. She went back to work.
If you stayed until the end, you already know why this story doesn't end with a kiss or a rescue or a bow. It ends with a woman going back to work, because that was always the point. Share it with someone who needs to see that. Subscribe, like, and comment for more.